this put me in mind of wondering if there's a name for this situation. You've got recognition of a real problem, in this case, racism. A solution is proposed, in this case, Black Lives Matter. And then the logical leap that seems to be ever more accepted and acceptable in polite society is that those who resist the solution that's been proposed are accused of denying that the problem exists at all. And so in this particular case, you have anyone who resists Black Lives Matter as a solution to the problem of racism. Instead of being told, actually, we wish you wouldn't do that, or here's why we think Black Lives Matter is all of that, we are told, if you reject the solution that we've come to, then you reject that there's a problem at all. And of course, it will be true that all of those who reject that there's a problem will also reject that a solution is necessary. So that is a tiny subset, right, of the people who reject the solution. But in fact, most people who reject a solution to a well-known problem are not, in fact, saying, therefore, the problem doesn't exist. But this is a way that we get slandered, effectively, and get shut down. And it serves to confuse a whole lot of people when we are told, by critiquing that solution, you are denying, the humanity of the people or the racism exists, right? So I was thinking about that in that context. And then I was thinking about exactly the same framing in the context of COVID, in light of a conversation I had with a doctor who was trying to compel me that our 15-year-old child needed to be vaccinated. I went in and said, he's on prophylactic ivermectin, which has a efficacy in terms of the prophylaxis that's on the same level of magnitude as the vaccines, and has a safety record that is 40 plus years long. And that, clearly I think that this is serious, that the pandemic is serious. And he responded to me by trying to make me scared, by trying to make me feel guilty, and furthermore, by trying to demonstrate that what I was doing was proof that I didn't believe that COVID was serious. And so once again, the framing is, you've got recognition of a real problem, in this case, the pandemic, which we've spent, since March of 2020 talking about. Recognition of a real problem, a solution is proposed. In this case, the solution that is acceptable in, again, polite society is vaccines. And anyone who resists the solution that has been proposed is accused of not recognizing that the problem is real. Once again, those people who actually don't think COVID is serious or think it's a plot or whatever will, of course, also reject the solutions. So all those people do belong in the category of people who say, actually, I'm not taking your solution. But the majority of people who are skeptical of the solution are saying, yes, real problem. There are probably multiple ways to go about solving that problem. Here's another one at which point we are confronted with, no, you're not allowed to have multiple solutions. And if you consider multiple solutions, you are denying that a problem exists. And therefore you are an anti-vaxxer, you're a COVID denier, you're a racist, whatever it is. And this is a rhetorical trick that is super powerful and I think incredibly widespread.
Yeah, I would say it is actually, you've described more than one trick that work as a system, right? So there's subsets of this. There is the label on the box does not match the contents. There is the label on the box is itself a Kafka trap, right? Yes. How does one oppose a box that says Black Lives Matter, right? How does one oppose the Patriot Act? Right? The trick is, as soon as you attempt to engage the thing, it's like a million different versions of when did you stop beating your wife, right? And it is reflective of two things, I think. One is a stratagem, as you're describing, and the other is an overwhelming failure of Bayesian thinking or nuanced thinking. Right, in favor of categorical thinking, right? So, if it is true that you have concerns about the vaccine safety. And if it is true that somebody who is against all vaccines will also have concerns about this vaccine safety, then somehow you are burdened with their presence roughly in the same general neighborhood, even though your positions are actually in no way connected, right? They may be resistant to vaccines because they think it's a government plot to implant microchips. And you may be resistant to novel vaccines because you don't know what you don't know, right? Which is obviously just factually true.
Right. And, hallelujah, it turns out that there's something for which the safety data are abundant, and the evidence of efficacy in both prophylaxis and treatment seems to be strong. Having a member of the medical profession try to fearmonger me into providing a novel solution that we are being told is the only responsible solution, as opposed to one that many researchers, many medical professionals have said, actually, no, ivermectin is effective here and again, safe.
So I agree with your analysis of what happened. Mm-hmm. I strongly suspect the doctor in question had no idea that he was doing any such thing. He was actually a victim of a campaign of fear-mongering. Yeah. And the interesting thing is that the fear is contagious. It is deployed in such a way that somebody who responds they've been given a very narrow view. It's like an anamorphic presentation where they have been told, stand right here and look at only these things, and voila, a very clear picture emerges. And then having absorbed that picture, the point is, oh, now you're an agent dispensing the stand here and look that way message, when in fact, if you look from almost any other perspective, it's not clear. And there's indeed an obvious question about, okay, how does one individual rate, for example, the likelihood of unknown serious harms down the road from novel vaccines, right? And reasonable people, experts, can disagree over how one would rate the likelihood of those things, because there's a question of, is this one novel technology or more than one, right? Is it a novel vaccine, or is it a novel delivery technology and a novel message, right? So we can have that discussion about what the most reasonable way to view those hazards are, but we can't have it if the point is everything is black and white, and anybody who has stood here can't possibly mistake the message, and they are actually morally required to inflict fear on others so that they will stand there too and see the same thing.
I think that's exactly right. And, fear enhances the ability for people to see things in a binary way, in a black and white way. You're either with us or against us. You're either being careful and rational or you're not. And I was lucky to be part of a conversation this week with a number of very smart people, one of whom said, part of what we are experiencing society-wide right now is a primacy of fear over love. And what we need is more love, less fear. And this struck me as one of the most salient points that I've heard in a long time, that it's easy to point to the fear-mongering and say, my God, you have to stop. What right do you have to try to make me more fearful? And I think that, to the degree that there are presumably, many other doctors trying to convince many other parents that if they have an alternative thing that they can do for their children that is actually as effective, that is dangerous, that those parents will respond with what feels like love for their children, as we hope all parents have, but which is actually driven by fear. And, I did have the sense, the sort of like mama bear sense, like, you stay away from my kid then, because you are using your fear to try to invoke fear in me to get me to do something that in my non-fearful state, I have assessed and feel confident, and am always looking for more information, but feel confident that this is a far better path forward for this person with his developing brain and body. And that is out of love, not fear.
Right. Now, there's something, it's very hard to do this job well, because when somebody is saying something that you have reason to believe actually creates a hazard for someone that you do love and for whom you have responsibility, it is natural to view them as, an enemy. rather than a victim. And in this case, the self-deploying contagious fear mechanism means that you should actually be in the frame of mind of, how do you deal with somebody who's responding to an endogenous delusion, right? Somebody may be dangerous because they are in the midst of trying to protect you from monsters that are trying to attack you. And they, so one has to simultaneously recognize that this is actually not a moral failing. This is a confusion that is resulting in a hazard. And that's not easy to do.
Right. And, to the degree, we've begun to hear in recent years that sometimes dealing with elderly patients with dementia, that going along with their narrative, entering their narrative, is actually the easiest thing for everyone involved, at least for a while, right? It confuses them less, and what harm does it cause? And in general, the elderly who have dementia are not, are not off on some genocidal rage or something, right? This, of course, is different. How do you can't use the same technique. You can't calm the person by pretending to go along with a delusional narrative.
Right. And in fact, yes, the problem is because it's contagious, it's actually odd now that I see the picture. You're dealing with a contagious narrative about a contagious pathogen, right? And the obligation, the person's sense that they must convince you to take your share of the action that's going to shut down the contagious pathogen is mirrored by the actual necessity to sort of halt this narrative so it does not cause us to do self-harm and harm to others that is easily avoided. And, how we deal with it, it really is mind virus stuff. And, we're just going to end up at layers of an onion here, but the degree to which the trick requires, and I don't know where the trick comes from. We've talked a little bit about where it might come from. I feel an obligation to leave the door open to other explanations. The explanation that we have explored being so diabolical that
which thing are you talking about now?
That the need for emergency use authorization for the vaccines has motivated a campaign of untruths about ivermectin.
Yeah, the EUAs never could have been enacted or deployed if there had been a viable treatment, and so ivermectin cannot be a viable treatment.
Right, and we will get back to that. But the point is, the trick involves all sorts of things, right? So for those of you who are not familiar instantly with the idea of anamorphic art, right? Anamorphic art is art. You've all seen chalk drawings on sidewalks and things that appear to be like chasms that people are standing on ledges over, right? And they're very compelling 3D images that look amazing. What may or may not be obvious is that they look that way from exactly one perspective, right? The artist drew it with the expectation that you would stand in the exact place. And if you walk by the art, it just looks distorted and strange. And so the point is, built into the art is the description of from where it will be viewed. So anamorphic arguments are ones that require that you stand in a place where you can't see the things that put the lie to them. And in concert with that, you have a campaign. And I have to say, I am shocked at how out in the open it is. You don't know, if you don't know to look for it, you can't see it. But if you do know to look for it, it's trivial to establish that it exists, right?
What's the campaign?
The campaign involves the removal of videos from YouTube. It involves the blocking.
So we're talking specifically about not being allowed to talk about ivermectin as prophylaxis or treatment for COVID. That's the topic.
And at some point, we're going to get to the question of why these things are the same question, right? Why the question of what to think about novel vaccines and the hazard they may or may not pose to you is the same question as what the heck is going on with ivermectin and why does everybody seem intent on preventing us from talking about the evidence, right? Those two things turn out to be the same question for reasons that it actually took me a long time to figure out, but I think it's pretty clear. But nonetheless, the point is, okay, you've got an anamorphic argument that requires you to stand in a particular place, but that's not good enough. Because from that place, you would see things that were inconsistent with the argument that's being made, but for the fact that the landscape has been purged of them. So they don't show up, right? And so how do you purge that landscape? You just take stuff down, right? Wasn't there some doctor who testified to Congress about ivermectin, and didn't he have all kinds of evidence at his disposal? And, wasn't he highly credible, and didn't he have exactly the right credential, right?
That sounds like a fever dream, honey.
Oh, right.
That can't possibly
Here, I'll
have
show
happened.
you. But
Yeah.
then, of course, YouTube took it down.
Right.
So the point is, it's not visible from lots of places that it would otherwise be visible.
Right.
So that the anamorphic argument is somehow part of this strategy, in which your point is you're going to be dropped into a trap where if you express skepticism of X, then you're definitely guilty of Y, right? That's the thing.
Yeah.